Okay, thank you for your patience. Had some technical difficulties. Can everyone on Zoom hear me? And can someone monitor the Zoom chat that I asked earlier to check that? Where? Okay, so we're just gonna quickly go through some intros and some bargaining. So, okay. I guess the agenda for today, after we do some quick intros and some bargaining 101, we are going to go into international rights, so opening up the question to talk or to ask about the international article. And then we're going to go into our first part of the economic articles, which will include transit, childcare, and lab transition funding. After that, we will go into the second part of economics, which will include wages. We separated the wages for SRU and ASCs in one group, and then after that group, we'll have wages for postdocs and ARs. And then lastly, we're going to end with non-economic rights, which will include access needs and disabilities and respectful work environment. And then lastly, we'll end with a final announcement and a exercise to build some power moving forward. Hey everyone. So first of all, welcome. Thanks for coming to this town hall. We wanted to make you give you a chance to basically give all of the questions and all of the thoughts that you guys have about each of these bargaining articles. For those of you who are new to this, we're going to provide a little bit of information about what's been going on so far. And for those of you who have been with us for a really, really long time, we appreciate you guys being here for that. It's been strong so far. We're really pleased with how great turnout has been. You guys are incredible for being out here. Great point. Thank you. So we should. It's been so long. I really should do that. Student. We love you. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an intro to the format for today. For those of you who might be a little bit new to town halls, the way that we're going to do like kind of the back and forth of questions and answers is we're going to give someone from the audience, either here or on Zoom, a chance to ask your question for 2 minutes. So you'll have 2 minutes to be able to ask your question. And then we're going to give either one of the bargaining team members or one of the so we're going to be up here 2 minutes to reply to that. And after that 2 minutes, we're going to go into a round of essentially discussion. So each speaker after that gets 45 seconds to just say either a thought or a question, kind of following up on that initial question and answer. And we're going to go through people from the audience either here or over Zoom, and then one bargaining team responds for 45 seconds. And then we'll do one more round of that, 3 45-second talks from either people here or on Zoom. And also go back to one bargaining team response. And then we'll move on to the next sort of 2 minute question and repeat that cycle. So I just wanted to make a note, this is a hybrid event. So for any technical difficulties that we experience, apologies, this is our first time. We'll be monitoring the Zoom chat. So anyone on Zoom, please let us know if you can't hear or you can't see or something else comes up, and we'll try to address it as quickly as we can. We also wanted to note, since this is a hybrid town hall, we're going to be accepting questions both in person and on Zoom. So for people in person, we only have one mic to make audio a little bit easier for us. So we're going to ask if people can come, and it's a wired mic, as you can tell. So we're going to ask if people can kind of come up to the front of the steps, preferably on this side, a little bit further away from our speaker. So if you have a question, we're going to have you guys queue up kind of on this side, and we'll give you a chance to ask your question. If you're on Zoom, we're going to ask if you can please type in stack and then just the kind of article or the theme of the question that you're asking in the chat. And we're going to have someone keep track of that and also kind of queue up that way. So we're going to also have one thing we wanted to note. We know that not everybody is comfortable like speaking in public or we know also that there's just going to be so many questions, we probably won't be able to answer them all today. So we wanted to let you know that there is a QR code circulating around. Yes, thank you, Jade, for holding that up. There's a QR code where you can submit any of your questions online to a survey, and there are already questions that have been rolling in. And what we hope to do is we're going to try our best to incorporate some of those questions as they come up. If they're related to some of the topics that we're talking about, we'll try to have a chance to try to incorporate some of those questions into just that back and forth public discussion. And if we don't get to it, we're going to look through it afterward and try to answer those questions by email as best as we can. So please either ask your question on Zoom or in person or through that QR code.
I just wanted to quickly remind everyone that since this is a hybrid event, to try and keep, like, you know, there's going to be some talking in the audience, but try and refrain that as much as possible, because then there's just going to be, it's going to be hard for the people on Zoom to hear what's happening if there's a lot happening in the audience as well. So please be mindful of that.
All right, so we're going to get started with just a little bit of introduction to kind of what bargaining is and how it's been going for a little while. So as you all probably know, this strike is a huge effort, and it's a huge effort in part because we have 4 separate bargaining units that have all come together to make this happen. So many of you have seen our UAW signs, you've seen UAW everywhere. That's the United Auto Workers, and they're a parent union. It was here for the UAW, love them. So the UAW is actually a parent union for a lot of different locals. We at UCSF and all the UCs comprise 4 of those, 3 of those locals, I think, actually, but 4 bargaining units. So one of those locals is UAW 5810, and that actually comprises 2 units. So we have both postdocs and academic researchers that are 2 separate bargaining units that fall under kind of one local. So that's one. And the other one that we want to, there are 2 more that we want to note. One is UAW 2865, and that one is the academic student employees, so tutors, TAs, readers. And the last one, which doesn't have a contract yet and doesn't technically have a number, is the SRU, the Student Researchers Union. We love them. So that union just got recognized kind of within the last year-ish, so the other groups we want to note have a contract already that they had agreed upon before with UC, and the SRU is actually negotiating our very first contracts. So things might take longer. It's just a kind of a thing to note. This is all equal. So a little bit of a timeline. Postdocs actually began bargaining with UC first, and they started in April, not of 2022, but 2021. So they have been bargaining for a very, very long time and negotiating for the past year and a half. And throughout that year and a half, each of these bargaining units that I mentioned before have joined this collective bargaining process with the UC. And as you all have heard a number of times, throughout that time, the UC has engaged in several unfair labor practices and has generally been not very good at bargaining with us. So some of those unfair labor practices include not giving us background information and data that we need to make fair proposals and make proposals that are evidence-based. We as scientists love evidence-based data. And then also taking several months to respond to any of our proposals. So several of you guys know, like, many of our different units have tried to submit proposals to UC, and they have often taken several months to reply to any of the things that we've been trying to ask them to negotiate with us about. As a note, they only have 1 bargaining team. So as I said, we are 4 separate bargaining units. They only have 1 bargaining team. So it is going to take them some time to do that. But it is interesting that they have started to bargain a lot faster ever since we started the strike. In September, union organizers realized that we did need to take some action to actually escalate a little bit to get the UC to talk to us. And in mid-October, as you guys all remember, our union reps ended up asking us if we would be willing to go on strike with them. And in a historic vote, 98% of us said yes. So 98% of us are willing to do what it takes to get the UC to talk to us. As a note, for the 3 units that already had contracts, their contracts expired October 31st of this year, which is why we've started. Lean just a second to have her tell us a little bit more about how bargaining goes.
So audio.
As soon as we figure out our tech
Okay, so we gotta go
details.
back to same as. Yeah.
Sorry, some technical difficulties. Sorry on Zoom. An update, or sorry, a general idea of how bargaining works. So us members elected, or so sorry, not us members. So our bargaining team members who are elected to the union work with UAW staff to put forth an initial proposal to the university. The contract contains articles, which are portions of the contract that cover separate topics like wages, cost of living, housing, access needs, and more. Then the university passes back their proposals, rejections, and shares their priorities. Both the University of California and the union are required to bargain in good faith, which is a legal concept that means the union must be intending to find an agreement, but the university must also try to come to agreement with and compromise with us. Each article is bargained about on its own or as part of a package, a collection of proposals. If an article is presented as part of a package, the bargaining team can pull the package back as a legal undo at any time. Once the union and the UC come to tentative agreements on the articles, this contract is proposed to their respective memberships, students, postdocs, ARs, and specialists, so basically all of us. And then we can vote yes or no on the contract. If we vote yes, the strike ends and the contract is passed and becomes binding for 4 years. If members vote no, the union and the UC return to the bargaining table where some or all of the articles the phone call can be reopened depending on membership priorities. And then the contract can be voted on again and we will continue striking if that is the case. So I'm going to bring up our bargaining team members to start answering questions. Our first topic, I already forgot, is international. So now we're going to open up the floor for international questions. So if you have questions, please start lining up here. Or at any point during the question or answers you feel that you want to make or you want to participate in the discussion that's going to follow the Q&A, please start lining up over here. On Zoom, please start saying staff, whether staff for question or staff for discussion. Oh, I'm just going to pass it. Oh, well, I guess quick intros. Yeah, just introduce your name, your position, and pronouns.
I'm Zach Mullen-Bruckstein. I'm a second year BMS, and I'm an alternate for the SRU bargaining team.
I'm Jade Moore. I'm a postdoc in radiation oncology department, and I'm the rep for postdoc.
Hi, I'm Melissa Mendez. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a third year Tetrad grad student, and I am on the SRU bargaining team.
I'm a secretary and alternate recording secretary for the postdoc bargaining team.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karnika Bhardwaj. I'm an assistant specialist in the Department of Anatomy, and happy to be here and ask some questions. Thank you.
Okay, so do we have anyone on Zoom ready for a question? Okay, if there's no one in person, this is when we go to that QR code. But really, no one has any questions? I'm shocked on it. Okay, let's wait for Anthera. Oh, you found one? Okay.
Hi. So we have a question from the survey. I know international workers have a right to strike. However, what do we do if our immigration status is threatened by departments or supervisors?
We'll start off by saying that's illegal, and you should report any of that to us. And reporting, you should definitely send that information on. so that we can continue filing. But also, I think that you should talk to your other lab members about support around that issue, because everyone is allowed to go on strike regardless of your status in this country, and that shouldn't be used against you. But also should bring more people to the picket line, because it shows that there's differences in power dynamics, and that your boss could try to use this against you, something that's really important for your livelihood, to try to get you back to work, that only really supports them. So I think it's important that you champion that as a reason to come back to the picket line, because we need these protections in our contracts.
So, actions in Zoom or in person, I'm going to give everyone.
Perfect. Yes.
So international related questions, the main theme for us is the multi-year initial appointments. My question is, I know there's been some progress on that, but a weird kind of progress where the university for postdocs was offering 2-year initial appointments, but with a lot fewer rights in the first year, like you can get fired for no reason and that kind of thing. So I wanted you guys to elaborate on that, because I'm not super up to date.
Specific to postdocs, we're going to respond back to that proposal with language around how you can actually be quote unquote fired or let go. So as of now, what happens with our appointments is we have 1-year appointments, and essentially postdocs are silently let go. So they're not told that they're going to lose their jobs. They just don't have a conversation about it. And so what we want in our contract now, and what we're planning to repropose to them, are 2-year appointments with this idea that they would have to actually notify a postdoc if they're going to be let go within the first year, and a very tight window. And so the goal would be that you could still be let go in your first year, but you would need to be notified within a month's time, and then you would need to be essentially given servants pay for the time that you're going to let go. So it gives you the opportunity to look for other jobs as well as deal with visa related issues.
And also still demanding more than 1 year on the letter to give our international scholars longer visas when you use that letter to apply for a visa. And so those are still in our demands that we will be passing back.
Are there any follow-up discussion or comments to that specific question? On Zoom? On Zoom? No? Okay. Okay, then, sorry, we forgot to say, before you ask your question, please introduce yourself, just name and position and pronouns.
Hi, my name is Helen, she, her. I'm a postdoc in epidemiology. So when we move here, we sell our entire household. We pay the flight. Is there any, we pay the visa expenses. Is there any promises from UC to cover part of that cost?
As of now, no. Visa fees, we know, are a huge issue, and that is part of the reason why we've tried to go the route of the longer appointments. There's been a lot of pushback from UC on paying for visa fees because they feel like it's a choice that you've made, and so you should cover the cost. We obviously don't agree with that. But to lessen that cost, we think if we have longer appointments, that you don't have to return to your home country as often to deal with visa related issues, and you don't have to pay as much. Unfortunately, that's as far as we've gotten on that topic. Yeah.
Any discussion points anyone wants to bring up related? Yes.
Nadia, grad student, she, her. Is there any updates on the tuition rebates for non-resident tuition for international students, and also whether there's going to be a change in how much we're getting paid in tuition to offset the cost for grad students?
So I'll start out with your second question, just because it's easier to answer. So I think you're referring to the fact that grad students are appointed at what's called 50% full-time equivalent. And so they like to claim that we are part-time and only work part-time, which we all know, and make sure that they are very fully aware of it's not the case. There is not going to be a change to that appointment status just because that also ties into the university accreditation for degree granting authority, and because international scholars are not allowed to work more than full time. And so we want to make sure to be inclusive of international scholars as well in this. With regard to your first question, which was NRST, yes. Sorry. With regard to NRST, we have made a proposal and we are waiting to hear back from the UC on their proposal. We are very quickly narrowing down the number of proposals left to bargain on. So in order to have this finished, they will have to respond to us.
Any comments on that? What's the proposal? She's going to pull it up. Oh, yeah. I think we're going to have to start wrapping up on this section. So we're going to take one more question. Anyone else has a question while Melissa is looking up the answer to that question about the proposal? Yes. And then, oh, sorry, I realized none of us are please try and stand in front of the phone.
Hi everyone, Jaden, first year BMS student. My question is related to international rights, but it's related to every, thing we're bargaining for. It's how will we vote on what we want to accept when that time comes? And will people who it directly affects, like international students, for those international students' rights, be weighted more in that vote?
So I think your question is on like voting for the contract at the end. The vote is for the contract as a whole. So we either, as different units, will accept the entire contract or reject it, not for specific sections. Yeah, my understanding is that's the question is why do we not vote for specific sections? My understanding is that's just how labor law and contract works.
Yeah, so your question is around the fact that why aren't we voting on each section? So part of the bargaining process is that the bargaining team did surveys at the beginning of the bargaining process to ask members what were the issues that were most important to everyone. That's then how we determined what articles we were actually going to change. That was the voting process. Like, what do you think is most important? I think your question is more so like, now that we're getting to actual proposals, you want members to be able to vote as each article goes. This process is very quick. So we're at the table and we have proposals that go back and forth. And it's in that moment, we have to say whether or not we're going to have a tentative agreement. If we came back to members after every single article, we actually would never get a contract because we'd have to wait for us to have a proposal, then wait for you guys to vote and come back. And so unfortunately, that's not how that works. But if you have opinions about how things are going, you should definitely let your bargaining team members know because we're receptive to feedback. Does that answer your question, or do you? Yes, no, maybe so. In regards to ratification, though, which was the initial question, that is very similar to what happened with the SAB. It's going to be a yes or no on the entire contract. We either accept the entire contract or we don't. And that would then go back to the bargaining table.
Oh, do you have a discussion?
So there have been a couple of questions on Zoom about surveying and whether there are attempts to like either survey international students or do like statewide, form a statewide polling committee, especially since there has been chat about that in Signal and other venues. So is there basically a way to kind of tighten the feedback loop between the rest of the folks and the bargaining team?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think things like this, talking to people one-on-one, town halls is how we're currently doing feedback. I think personally, one concern I have with types of polls is I mean, we saw with the SAV that to get the turnout that we finally did took 10 days of door knocking, phone calls, tons of emails. I think when thinking about polling, the question is who are we reaching, how many people are we reaching, and then how do we kind of interpret if we have an answer about 10% of the entire population, how do we kind of take that into account as is that a majority opinion or kind of sampling bias? My understanding right now is that we don't have an official polling policy besides talking to people one-on-one on the line and town halls like this.
Sorry about that. I have a response to your question. So our position has always been full fee remission. Their position is been like waddling between no fee remission or partial fee remission, and so we are going to be pushing them hard on that. I think I'll just probably make this note now. I think if your question is what is the proposal, would you mind putting it in the QR code and then I can email you the proposal? Just because it's a little panicky here trying to pull things up and like read them and interpret them all on the fly. So, but
yeah, that's a great yeah. And then we really do need to move on after this.
Hi. My question was whether there's a chance that the postdoc union finishes the contract and reaches the contract first, and then the student union doesn't, and then the student union continues on strike and the postdoc doesn't. How is that going to work in terms of timing of all three units and the contracts?
so we have been bargaining in a coordinated manner. We have meetings or have tried to have meetings almost every night to update all the other units on where we are in our proposals, especially on the proposals where we are in lockstep and bargaining together. Our goal is going to be to make sure that we all reach a conclusion together so that we do not leave individual units out to dry. That is what our promise has been to each other, and that is what we are committed to.
There's one last follow-up in the Zoom just to Melissa's answer from before. It sounded like you were suggesting that the university is trying to run out the clock by bargaining on non-compensation issues. Is that a fair characterization, or were you trying to imply something else?
I mean, I think the idea of running out the clock is that we're going to be here as long as it takes, one day longer than the UC. But I do think that it is a fair characterization is that they want to push the economic stuff off, assuming that we're going to quit and go back to work, which is not going to happen.
Okay, so we're going to move on, but I also wanted to add a comment as a non-host of this event and just as someone in the audience. But if there's a part of the contract that you're not happy with, just know that you have every right to vote it down. So don't feel pressured or obligated. Like, if we want this to be a good contract, and if there's something that's really important to you, fight for it is what I'm saying, because everyone's vote counts. Okay, so now we're going to move on to economics. The first part of our economics section, which will include transit, childcare, and lab transition funding. Please hold off all wages questions for the second part of this. Currently, we're just taking questions for transit, childcare, and lab transition funding. Anyone on Zoom? Also, it's windy, so I think you may be hearing that audio. Oh, I'm also not on camera. Oh, awesome. And then, yeah, introduce yourself, position, pronouns.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brendan. I'm a second-year biophysics grad student. And I guess my question was, sorry, this is actually kind of about specifics again, but we've heard about like the transit passes and the e-bike discounts for postdocs, but like, I guess what are the actual, like, I know their original proposal was like $20 or something ridiculous like that, but I guess what is the new proposal?
So the answer is, I think, quite simple, because we are proposing the exact same thing that the postdocs are, and as are the ASEs. All units are bargaining, in lockstep on that one. In terms of what their most recent proposal is, I can certainly send it to you. Have it pulled up. It's also on fairuc.org. All versions of all proposals are on the website. Sorry. Okay. There are three main concepts that are part of the proposal. There is the e-bike discount. There is the pre-tax card that will be allotted with some amount of money in order to pay for transit costs. We are in the middle of a fight over what that amount of money should be. And there is the part which makes them bargain with the relevant transit agencies in the location that the UCs are based for no-fee transit passes.
It is important to note that the graduate students and ASEs have won whatever the amount is determined a double matching. So for example, if you put in $10 and UC is going to double that, and so then that comes up to 30, I think that's a huge win. Figuring out what that number is the only thing right now, but the fact that you will get some type of subsidy is really important. Fortunately, postdocs did not win that.
You'll get that.
Public or comment discussion for that. Is it related? Yeah, okay. Is there anyone related on Zoom? Okay.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a grad student in neuroscience. I was curious if in addition to the e-bike, there was a push for regular bike, because I know that e-bikes are about $2,000 and I regularly bike commute. So I was just curious if the UC has moved at all on those for regular biking.
We did have originally in our proposal a choice between the e-bike subsidy or money for repairs, for storage, maintenance, and repairs. They have not moved on that as far as I can tell. For a given period of time.
Do you want to come up and ask? You can kind of cut through. Yeah, that's okay. And then just briefly introduce yourself.
I'm Shijian from Bio program, 4th year, he, she, he, him. For the bike thing, because as the previous, sorry, I forgot, Sarah? Well, she said e-bike is extremely expensive. Even with the discounts, I'm likely not ever gonna get it. So then I'm left with my own bike, which is my usual bike, and the tire has been punctured multiple times, you know, because it's San Francisco. So I just wonder why the proposal is an e-bike or normal bike, because I guess even if you have an e-bike, your tire is gonna get punctured as well. And if it's punctured really bad, your tire is going to be replaced, and that's going to cost you $200. So I think it should be an and logic connection there, not or.
Yes, very logical. But I do want to caution everyone on this idea of like logic. Bargaining is not always a logical process, and so I understand that like e-bikes and bikes make sense for the collective because most of us don't even have cars, and of the ones who do come to the different campuses are either walking or on their bikes. But as of now, the university has basically already started negotiations for e-bike discounts, and so that's why they're willing to move on that. We're still trying to work towards getting subsidies for other aspects of like public transportation as well as bikes. That's the best I can offer you right now.
We have some comments on Zoom.
There's a quick follow-up question on Jade and Melissa's comments. Why are postdocs not getting parity on transit? And then there's a question in the survey as well. What is the status of parking pass subsidies for grad students, if we hadn't already covered that?
There's not parity for postdocs simply because and I will say this many times, postdocs are in a very weird place where we're treated like trainees when it comes to how much our salary is. So we shouldn't get paid a lot because we're trainees. but we shouldn't get subsidies because we're employees. And so when we get to conversations like childcare and transit and housing, then it's like, oh, well, you guys make enough money to cover those, and that's essentially why we don't have parity on that.
In terms of parking passes, the best offer that they have made to us so far is to give notice to any changes in parking rates. We have been trying to impose a cap, but we will have to see what their next proposal is on this.
And then we have someone on Stack in the Zoom. Right? Are we? Yeah, so if you're unable to unmute and ask your question.
Is that me?
Yes. Oh, wow. I can hear you clearly.
Hi, my name is Alina. I'm an SRU, and I wanted to ask about transition funding. So for background, if you're in a situation where you end up leaving a lab that's abusive or ableist, racist, sexist, and you're pretty much beyond your second year, it is on you or the PI to find incoming funding. Whereas when you're accepted as a first or a second year, the PI or the second year, the PI knows they'll have 1 year to figure out funding for you. So finding a lab has been really challenging due to the lack of transition funding, because every PI is like, love to, but I need 1 year of funding to do so. And I know that in several programs, at least one person has to leave in every single year cohort to switch labs. So it's a pretty common occurrence, usually more than one person. So last time I asked about this, there didn't seem to be any progress on transition funding, but there are other articles like access needs where we got outright rejections or we reproposed things. Is there any move on going for 1 year of transition funding or packaging that with something else like transit to get movement, and just emphasizing that 1 year seems to be really important for PIs in order to hear back about R01s and feel comfortable accepting students leaving abusive situations. Thank you.
So we believe we have a strong proposal on transition funding that is supported by, that we can support with what's called past practice. A lot of departments across the UC have some secret stash of money, mine included, that they use to help grad students, to pay grad students whilst they're making a difficult transition. We, in bargaining, have a legal constraint of moving on articles that are in either our court or in their court, by which I mean that they have either been passed to us or we have passed to them. Transition funding is still in their court, and so it is their responsibility to move closer to us on that front. They have not yet, and so at this point the legal cap on what we can do is continue to pressure them vocally at the bargaining table to respond on this. And obviously, since for us it is in our position is that this is a mandatory article that we are going to bargain on in order to finish this contract, this will have to be resolved in order for the contract to be finished.
Alina, we're going to have you unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, sorry. So just to get clarity, one, is the transition funding proposal not for 1 year? And two, in terms of past precedent, I'm already going through some of that, and I've talked to people in similar situations, and it essentially varies pretty heavily program by program, ranging from like 0 and an average of 3 months, which is insufficient. So I hope we wouldn't be relying on past precedent for students who are in trouble now or in the future. So yeah, the two questions are, can it be packaged with something else? And is the proposal for 1 year?
Yeah, the proposal is for 1 year. At its current place, it is for 1 year. In terms of my comment about past practice, I merely meant that if the university has done this before in other departments, if we had an opportunity to grieve a situation like this, it would be a strong argument to say that there are departments where this occurs. This is clearly feasible, and you should do it as well.
Any comments or discussion?
Sorry. So does that mean it is packageable? And does that mean that to get that past practice, we'd have to file a grievance and go through that whole 45-ish day process and possibly arbitration? Or just kind of like encourage them, which is sort of the situation we're in now?
We can't pass, is it on? Okay, sorry. Okay, to answer your question about packaging, we cannot pass a proposal in a package or as a standalone if it is not in our court. That is my understanding of the legal practice here. In terms of packaging in general, we had a conversation with Kavitha, our counsel, where she has recently advised us that we are at a point in bargaining, this kind of like quick, rapid fire, high stakes kind of portion of this, where packaging, the concept of packaging, which to make sure everyone is aware of what we're talking about, packaging is a legal move where you kind of group related proposals together and put forward an idea. The advantage of packaging is that this is not a legally binding move. Oh, okay, we're done on time. I see. The short answer is that we have been advised by our legal counsel that packaging is no longer advantageous here as a strategy and that we need to be moving quickly.
Thank you. And then we have some comments on Zoom.
So we have one comment from Matthew on Zoom saying, just want to second that the 1 year transition funding is very important and would like to tell bargaining team that it's good to continue pressuring UC to respond to this. And there's one more on Zoom that says that in response to some of the stuff Alina was saying just about grievance processes, that grievance processes make it quite difficult for people to access stuff like transition funding often because it puts extra burden on people who are already kind of struggling. So those are the comments on Zoom. There's one question on Zoom that is on a separate topic. So we're going to have T, if you can hear us, if you want to unmute and ask your question, go ahead. Just kidding. No, Mike. So I'm going to ask this question from T. What are the consequences of voting down a contract?
We would go back to the bargaining table and continue to work with the UC to come up with a contract that we thought that our members would accept. We would, ideally go back on strike and keep putting that pressure on. Yep, that's how that would go. Any additions?
And this is exactly why we're having these kind of forums, and I know people are reaching out, making their voices heard. While that would happen, it's very likely that would delay things and we would lose a lot of momentum. And so I think it's something that we should try to avoid as much as possible.
Comment? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we will close out with your question on childcare, and then we're going to move on.
All right, I'm Lexi. I'm a third year Tetrad student, she, her. My question is, how will the union bargaining for childcare change, if at all, the UCSF childcare grant? Because as it stands, I currently get my childcare paid completely from UCSF, but my understanding is that the UCs across do not have that same package. So will this now, like whatever you bargain for childcare, change like the amount that I would be getting, which to me, I don't know where the money comes from, and essentially.
So this contract, this agreement that we're negotiating is understood to supersede individual campus policy. So the agreement that we negotiate in terms of how much money should be reimbursed or allocated to you as part of the childcare program will be legally binding.
And I'm not a grad worker. I'm not familiar with this grant process. It's awesome that you have, somebody paying for, it sounds like, all of your childcare. That's amazing. That also shows that UC can come to. Okay, that's something we'll have to follow up on because I'm not sure about the UCSF specific compensation. So maybe we can chat afterwards.
I just want to highlight that what I get, I mean, is almost like 17,000, and what you guys are bargaining for is like 4,000. That's a huge difference. Like that makes a very big difference to at least grad students here at UCSF. Any comments on that? Oh, yeah. So then there's a Zoom comment. So on Zoom, is it Zara? Zara, are you able to unmute yourself and share your comment? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So one other follow-up to say about the consequences of a contract being voted down is that that sets the sort of the bare minimum of what we can get and sets a precedent for going to impasse. And if impasse is called, then that means that a third-party negotiator comes in and gets to look at everything that's been talked about and basically impose a contract from there. And that would be a really disastrous consequence. So it's important to keep that in mind in terms of consequences of voting down ratification of a contract.
Okay, so we're going to move on for the sake of time. Now we're going into the second part of our economics question. So first, we're just going to start with SRU and ASE. So graduate student researchers, tutors, and TAs. This is the time to ask your question. And then after we're done with SRU and ASCs, then we're going to move on to postdocs and ARs about wages. Students, okay. There's a question on Zoom. Okay, go ahead and ask your question first.
Hi everyone, Adam, 5th year PhD student at BMS, use he, him pronouns. My question is, I was talking with my mom about our contract negotiations last night and about wage increases. And she was like, oh, well, normally those are retrospective. So you win a wage increase and it applies to the previous time when you haven't had a contract. So I'm wondering if that will be true for, especially for the postdocs who have been out of contract for about 2 years now, but also even for us graduate students for whatever 1 month or 2 months between when we formed our union and got our first contract.
For SRs, the wage proposal that we win will go into effect starting next October. So it will not be retrospective, as the language of the contract is written currently.
We have a follow-up on that on Zoom.
So there's actually a question, is it acceptable that UC proposes salary increases starting October 2023, or is that like another attempt to delay improvements for researchers?
I will say that I don't necessarily know the history on that package about how that language came to be, but that is for all of the like article versions that I've seen has been the language throughout, but I don't know necessarily the reasoning behind that. Sorry, I cannot give a better answer to that question.
Any comments on Zoom?
Okay. There's a slightly related question. Just has the UC clarified where the funding sources for the increase in wages would come from? Would it come from a UC money pot, or rather just not PI's budgets?
No, they have not clarified. I mean, I think our official line throughout this has been that is the UC's issue that they're going to have to figure out, and that they have the money to pay us a dignified wage. And yeah, but they have not been very specific. I think it's going to come from many places. We in our meeting with Dan Lowenstein, the EVCP, the other day, I mean, was saying that they are currently talking to all of their finance people to try to figure out all the streams of revenue that the increased wages will come from. But I feel confident that they have the money. The state does, the country does to pay us a living wage. Yeah.
Any other comments on that?
So Sophie on Zoom, if would you like to? Okay, I'll read out the comment from Zoom chat. So Sophie says, I don't understand why it would go to an impasse if you voted down the contract when Columbia, which had a strike earlier, did it 3 times to get a better contract and are also represented by UAW. There's also a note that railroad workers are voting down their contract today because they didn't get vacation time. And since UC has a 188 billion surplus and a $44 billion budget, that they should be able to make this work.
I mean, at this point, it's just comments. So, you have a comment.
So not a response to
Or you can-
okay. I mean, I don't know all the specifics of the Columbia contract, but I would refute that it is a better contract. They did have to give up real concessions to things that they had previously won in their contract in the second rounds. The wages that they won at the end are already what we have on the table from 6%. Already what we have on the table for UC, not nearly as much as what we need. So I do want to reiterate Evan's point that I think it is not usually not advantageous to the people on strike to vote it down and kind of go back on strike with possibly less numbers.
Also, just to reiterate, our strike is a historic strike, and we are in new territory. We have a lot of power because we have a multi-unit strike. That also means there are not a lot of historical comparisons. In the Columbia strike, I understand that they did not bargain for several weeks on end. And here, we're not just grad workers, right? And so we have postdocs, we have ARs. So there are a lot of differences. People can have opinions about what was better, but I strongly refute the fact that Columbia had a better contract than we do.
Any more comments about this specific question? Okay, so Melissa just wanted to quickly clarify something on childcare, and then we're going to go to a Zoom question from Zara.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to clarify a point on your question, Lexi, because I think I misunderstood it and I answered it incorrectly. So what I was trying to say was that whatever we negotiate would supersede something that is worse. But it would not supersede something that is better. I will look up what the specifics are and get back to you in an email format, but I just really wanted to make sure that was clear. It sets the minimum. I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to clarify that.
Any more questions about SRU wages or ASC wages from Zoom?
So I'm not sure if this was addressed, but there's just a point that the bargaining team said that progress was being made for GSR wages and they expected a new proposal the week of Thanksgiving. But is there an update on how that is going or whether we've received a specific proposal?
We have not bargained since Tuesday of last week in 11 days. So postdocs have resumed bargaining today. We hope that this week, sometime soon, we will get this proposal from UC. Mm-hmm.
Oh, the video's frozen. Okay. Okay. Any more questions for SRU bargaining before we move on to postdocs? Oh, wait, no, Zara was going to ask a question, but I guess
I can still ask Angeline if there's.
Oh, Zara, let's get one more comment and then let's move on to you.
There's just a note that they want to make sure that wage compensation is definitely included in the bargaining for graduate student researchers. Apparently, there's been a little bit of confusion. But
you don't have to comment. Just to say that with the Okay, we're just going to move on. Zara, please ask your question.
Thanks. I just want to get some clarity on what seems like a conflicting message here. On the one hand, we're being told that things need to move quickly because if things do not move quickly, they will not be advantageous for us. And on the other hand, we're being told that if we vote down a contract that we don't feel is advantageous for us, we won't be able to successfully get more out of the UC. If it is really that dangerous for us to vote down a contract, what would be wrong with fighting for longer to get a contract closer to our initial demands?
I will share my opinion on this. I think the danger that I see in taking a while and slowing down is the concept of impasse, which is a process that the UC has signaled that they are thinking about trying to impose, more so for some units than others, that would invite a state mediator to recommend a contract. So we would give up decision-making power over our bargaining. They would recommend a contract that would then be either voted up or down. Because it is state mediated and recommended, it would likely not be enough, not be super attractive. And worst case scenario, if we were to vote that contract down, the employer would then have the right to impose a contract. So I think that is what I am extremely wary of in terms of slowing down bargaining. I think that any movement that we can do, any gains that we can make, are preferable to a mediator.
But what does that movement have to look like? I mean, I guess we can take the access needs article as an example here, right? The currently T8 access needs article by everybody except for 2065 looks very different than the initially proposed article. Would movement look like something? I mean, I know that because it's T8, we can't bring it up again without mutual agreement on both sides. I'm just using this as an example here. Would movement be acceptable if it was closer to the original article instead of this like very demonstrably modified version? I guess basically, can we have movement without having significant concessions?
So one thing that we've been trying to do a lot is to do conceptual movement or framing movement rather than material, number movement. And so that if, for example, in the access needs article, as you just mentioned, a lot of our gains, or what we perceive to be our gains on that, have been through table talk, which is legally enforceable language that the university has set at the table, or through conceptually framing like the Joint Labor Committee or certain things as places to impose access needs. And so our strategy is to then kind of make movement laterally and around and try to bring the UC closer to us in concept so that we can then fight over whatever the numbers are without eroding our core demands.
One other thing I wanted to touch on in terms of like the speed of movement here. I certainly don't think any of us feel that we have to like move at a rush pace, like where we do things without thinking about it. And I think I'm super impressed today with how many people we have out here. I think our power remains strong, and as Gabriel said this morning, our power is really strong now. Is around the time where specific at other campuses where grades are going to start having to be brought in for finals for the undergrads. But I do think we have to consider like what our power long term is. In 2 months from now, will we still have the same numbers if we really like try to hold out for as long as possible? I don't have the answer for that, but I think we have to be conscious and think about what our power looks like across the state and how it might change day to day and week to week. And right now, I feel like it's very strong, and I think that is why the bargaining team is trying to make movement to get to a contract that we're all happy with.
For the sake of time, we do have to move on. Is there any last comments on Zoom?
Yeah. So there are a couple of questions on Zoom that I'm just going to read out. One is from Regan. If we accept a contract, what room exists to make changes to that in the future? And then there's also a comment from Sophie that says the current statewide ask for wages is $54,000 and no increases tied to any cost of living index. So right now it's a fixed 7% a year, which is okay sometimes, but between 2021 and 2022, rent increased 20 to 30% at UC Davis and 67% since 2018 in UC Santa Cruz. So Zara put forth a proposal where we make equitable instead of equal wages, and where we make different amounts that give us the same essential spending power and cost of living. That's tied to kind of the living wage index from MIT instead. And this would also make sure that UCSF specifically gets paid appropriately, since $64,000 is kind of dependent, which is what we're hoping for UCSF, is dependent on how the meeting with the dean goes and is not currently in the contract. And this has seemed well received. Is there movement on amending the contract to be an equitable proposal tied to living wage index instead of housing? And I also wanted to add, sorry, since we're getting all of these questions out there, I also wanted to add that before there was a question from Holly, and the question was amended to, is compensation being bargained for directly, or is this done separately from the process of these other contract demands somehow? Sorry, there was a lot of questions, but... So to go back just for a minute, the first one was, if we do accept the contract, what room exists to make changes in the future? And then the question about, can we tie this, the living wage to a kind of equitable stuff across campuses instead of just here? And then is compensation direct, or is it separate from the rest of the demands?
I'm going to start with the first one. What room is there to change the contract? So this contract will be for 4 years. At the end of that time, we will then be what's called out of contract and have an opportunity to bargain a new contract. That being said, the full strength and power of the contract is won through grievance and arbitration procedures. And so the full extent of the interpretable and enforceable language will kind of come about as we file grievances and win grievances and kind of impose what the interpretation of the contract means. It's kind of similar to like the relationship between the Constitution and the Supreme Court. Like in these fights, in these grievances, we will kind of really draw out the meaning of the words that we've agreed on, and that will kind of like show what the actual enforceable power of it is. The second part, yeah, okay, so Matt, the other UCSF bargaining team rep, his initial proposal was trying to have some kind of locality-based wage that would give different campuses equitable wages. At the very beginning of this process, that kind of faction was outvoted. We were outvoted in terms of having locality-based wages. However, given the noise that we have, the noise and the power behind a lot of people at UCSF and UC Santa Cruz who are bringing up this issue again and saying that $54K, while great for a lot of the other campuses, is simply not enough to live here, we, the wages committee on the SRU and ASE 2865 bargaining team have met again over this weekend and are committed to fighting again to give this idea of locality-based wages another shot. We are going to try our hardest to convince the rest of the bargaining team to incorporate some kind of locality-based concept into the current framework that we have. That I as a UCSF bargaining team representative, I'm certainly committed to pushing this as far as I am physically able to. But I absolutely hear all of you in your very incredibly valid points that 54K is just not quite enough for UCSF, and we are going to try our hardest to make sure that this concept is accepted by the entirety of the bargaining team.
So there are a couple of questions. So I wanted to note that there was the question from Holly about, is compensation being bargained for directly, or is this done separately from the processes, the other demands in the contract?
Yes, it is being bargained directly as a wages article. So it is part of this entire contract. It's its own article.
And then there's another note of, it looks like the UCSF campus specific request of 64K isn't included in the contract demands, but wasn't that kind of the major outcome of the mass membership meeting in October? Like, why hasn't it been included? And yeah, so that's essentially.
Yeah, I think like Melissa mentioned, I'll just try to reiterate, is that was the outcome of the bomb here in October. And as a bargaining team, we have gone to the other members of the bargaining team saying that this is something that we believe in strongly, and it simply has just been voted down in the language of our wages demand, and we will continue fighting. There's been like new as we're starting to have discussions again around how our wage proposal will be shaped in the end. We're making another push to include that language, but that's simply the reality of how we've got here.
Just wanted to read.
Wait, sorry. Can I please respond?
Go ahead and respond.
What is the timing of that being voted down relative to the strike authorization vote? And if, why? Maybe that just got lost in the noise, but a lot of us, at least in terms of the people I've spoken to and like me personally, like a lot of our decision making in this going into authorizing a vote, like specifically as a member of UCSF, was in the belief that we wouldn't be left behind, and that being represented in like a campus specific increase that's tied to cost of living.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to what the timeline of this was. What I mean when I say that it was voted down was when we were initially drafting our proposal several months ago and trying to figure out what a wage proposal would look like in a contract that applies to the entire UC system. We were kind of split into two factions, where one believed that a flexible wage system would be more appropriate, and that is when we were voted down. Since then, we have tried, multiple times to have this conversation again, and the majority of the bargaining team has, not always agreed on this. We have, as I've said before, over this weekend, we have reopened this conversation, and I believe we have reopened it much more productively to a point where we can productively have this conversation again.
This just feels like a slap in the face to be finding it out 2 weeks into a strike, when what I was led to believe, or was under the assumption, I guess, or incorrect impression that we were fighting for wasn't actually on the table.
Yes, I definitely, I'll disagree with you. Like, the bargaining teams are definitely thinking about equitable wages across the different regions, and that's the conversations that we have when we think about wages. We understand that some locales for the state of California are different, but we also have to be mindful of the fact that these are all coming out of the same types of money pots. And so I think Melissa has already addressed that, in the sense that UC is trying to determine where they're going to find additional funding, and that also means for the UCSF campus. I do also want to bring note to you guys that we don't die with the bargaining contract. Just because we have a contract in place, that doesn't mean that we can't continue to fight for more in the 4 years that we're waiting for another contract. A lot of things that have happened prior to actually getting to bargaining for SRUs, while we've been in bargaining for postdocs, have been due to the work that you guys are doing on the ground, not because of what's happening at the bargaining table. The power is the people, not the bargaining team. And so I think it's important for you to know that if you don't like what ultimately ends up in the contract, that doesn't mean that you just go back to your lab silently and don't say anything for another 4 years. You continue to fight for a higher wage at your campus. You continue to talk to your deans. You continue advocating on your behalf with your PIs to make more. These are all minimums. They can pay you as much as they want to. They can give you more access to lots of things. The contract is not, you can only be paid 54, you can only be paid 64. They can pay you as much as they want to. And so it's important that we feel empowered as scientists to ask for more and not to take the minimum.
I'm going to read out some questions or comments on Zoom. So the first is that there's a question of the rest of the UC campuses expect us to vote up this contract without being represented. Why can't you tell the rest of the groups that UCSF will not vote yes on this contract without representation? And why can't you tell your fellow bargaining team members that UCSF will not vote yes on this contract unless we get representation in the contract? And this is bullshit otherwise. Another note is that paying equitable wages costs less for the UC than paying like $54,000 or $54K across the entire set of UC campuses. So,
yeah, I think we should move on to postdocs and just kind of leave it on that.
Just gonna last comment is our wages should be in the contract as everyone else's. Not that we have to go afterward and do extra work after the strike. So that is the last comment we'll have on wages. We're going to move on to postdoc wages.
Yeah. So we're moving on to postdoc wages. What? NARs, yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear what that. So just if anyone has questions, please come this way or in the Zoom chat or Zoom room. Let us know if you would like to ask a question about postdoc wages and AR wages. Someone's mic is on in the Zoom room. You can go ahead and ask your question. Or is that accidental? Postdocs, ARs, wages? Okay.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm a postdoc. I use he, him pronouns. My question was on, I think this probably applies to grad students as well, but there's this sort of October 1st start of changes in wages. How big a priority is it for the bargaining team to change sort of when that phases in? Is this is that period of time related to this arbitration that has to happen after the contract gets ratified, or is that just the UC wanting a discount on our labor for another year?
Definitely the latter portion, them wanting a discount because they need to figure out where the money is going to come from and to give softer blows to our PIs in terms of their already determined grants that they have or money and funding sources. As of now, for postdocs and ARs within our contract, it would be a start in April is when most of the ratification would take place. But we're also still having those negotiations and pushing back to try to get changes to happen sooner and faster. Yeah.
So there's a question from the survey that says, is the union satisfied with the offers of wage increases given by the UC so far? I assume this given that the union called it unprecedented and an overall change in tone of the mail that postdocs received last week. So is that true? Is this, are we kind of satisfied with the wage offers from UC?
I would say that we're not satisfied, but I think it's also important for us to know the movement that's actually happened. So that is the language around unprecedented, that they've actually started to make movement since we've been on strike. Prior to going on strike, the university said there was no way that postdocs were going to be able to make more. And so I think it's important to show that the work that we've done at the picket lines has actually caused them to move on the wages proposal for postdocs and ARs.
Hi, my name is Rachel. I'm an AR, she, her pronouns. So I'm a specialist here, and which means that I'm actually, I got my PhD in 2015. So I did my PhD and then I did my postdoc. And so I'm probably one of the higher paid members of the union on strike. But that being said, I live in San Francisco and have 7 years post-PhD experience and almost 250 citations and make $90,000 a year. And another thing I would like to draw attention to is that the ARs are not eligible for any like career development or training opportunities that the grad students and postdocs are available for. And currently, I think that we're still at 4.5% is what they're offering us as an increase. So I just wanted to see if there was any movement for the ARs. Thank you.
I mean, I think the ARs are planning to propose back a higher percentage increase when they talk to UC today, or now, I should say, because postdocs and ARs are currently in bargaining us. We're having this conversation with the goal to have more. I think the more important thing for a lot of postdocs and ARs are also those that are already above the step scale, making sure that they're continuing to get percentage increases so that they're not kind of stagnant. And so that's also what's being proposed back to the UC.
Any comments on Zoom?
Well, we'll do Zoom first.
There's a quick Zoom question on or in the survey saying whatever final wage changes come into place, would they be reflected on our salaries or from the time that it comes to power, only after kind of the full present recruitment year is over? Is that's October 2023?
Yeah, just to reiterate, currently our proposal says that it would start in April for postdocs, but this has not been agreed upon yet, so we'll have to wait to determine like the final date.
Hey y'all, I'm Jeannie. I'm a postdoc here in psychiatry. And I just have a comment. I first just really want to thank our bargaining team. I know that they get a lot of like slack and it must be really hard to be in those rooms. So thank you guys. I also am just like so unbelievably impressed with what's happening on the postdoc side. I have a lot of people in my life. I'm from San Francisco. I have a lot of people in my life who worked at UCSF who are really astonished at what we're getting from all the power of people being here. And so I think that this is just, I just want to like reiterate that this is really amazing, and it can be hard sometimes to think, oh, we're not getting everything that we want. And I'm so frustrated with you on that. And these are huge steps. And if postdocs get these steps and grad students can keep using the same power, there's really a lot that can be done here. And as somebody who loves their research and recognizes that my career really sits on the research that I'm doing as a postdoc, I also am just trying to wrap my mind around really accepting a contract when we feel like it's pretty much as good as we're going to get, because otherwise we're going to get stuck in this place where it's going to be much harder for us as postdocs to get an academic job that will get us out of this postdoc system. So just some thoughts, some things to consider, but I'm like so energized by seeing everybody out here. I'm so appreciative to our bargaining team. So yay.
Just in the spirit of reading out all of the chats on Zoom, there are a couple of seconds saying thank you to the bargaining team. And others wanted to say that despite any shock or frustration, we're still very, very grateful to the bargaining team. So thank you. Any other questions on postdoc wages?
I'm going to give everyone one last minute to think or opportunity to ask a question. Okay, and then we will move on. Oh yeah, no, you can ask. Postdoc wages and AR wages. No, you don't have a question on that? Okay. Any last minute Zoom questions? We have another comment reiterating, thank you to everyone seconding the bargaining team that, everyone is grateful for all the work that you guys do. And even though there is some frustration, like people at the end of the day are very grateful. So now we're going to move on to our very last section, which we want to recognize that we don't have time to cover every single article, but for this last section, we will be covering access needs and disability, as well as respectful work environment. So we will be taking questions right now for access needs, disability, and respectful work environment. Okay, we have Stack Alex. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks. So I'm Alex, they, them, grad student. So disability justice means creating an accessible community free of ableism, as well as race, gender, and class-based marginalization. It means creating spaces that are accessible without asking, without additional requests, where seeking accommodations becomes unnecessary because the baseline is accessibility, and not just for people who are disabled, but for all of us. And the original access needs proposal was co-written by disabled people and included a number of specific requirements that would move towards accessibility by default. For example, requiring live captioning and virtual components for things like lab meetings and seminars. In addition, it removed the requirement for medical documentation, required ableism training for supervisors that we co-developed, created centralized funding to pay for access needs, and established a collaborative process where disabled people and the university have to agree on access needs. However, this access needs proposal is largely gone. Things like live captioning virtual events and accessibility by default as a concept were removed. Medical documentation is required, in the broken interactive as opposed to collaborative process, which allows the university to determine what a reasonable accommodation is, remains intact. The proposal has no co-developed ableism training for supervisors, And when these concerns were raised to members of the bargaining team, disabled organizers were told that these were not concessions. They were reminded that although there were very few specifics remaining in the proposal, any access needs issue could be discussed in the Joint Labor Management Committee that meets once every 6 months. They said we can assert certain definitions and rights that were not mentioned at the bargaining table and file grievances to try to win these rights later. But this is the opposite of accessibility by default and puts marginalized people at the forefront of fighting for our rights. You know, can you imagine if someone said we weren't going to put wages in the contract, but we just talk about wages in a committee that meets twice a year when we don't have the power of a strike, and then grieve the university if those talks don't go well? So my question is, can we expect the bargaining team to renegotiate the access needs proposal, or will the onus continue to be entirely on disabled people to fight for our rights? Thank you.
So, Alex, please correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I got from that, the question is that disabled folks feel frustrated that they are the ones who are continuing to fight for disability justice, and they are, Alex pointed out that a lot of the points in the article got kind of docked. So the question is, will you all fight for disability justice? Alex, again, please correct me if I'm wrong.
I mean, yeah, I think we are all committed to fighting for disability justice. I'll say I was not on the bargaining team while the most of this article was written and revised, so I can't speak too much to the history. But I think a big part of why we have a union is to provide people with the support to fight for their rights in the grievance and arbitration process, which I think is required no matter what the language in the contract is. The UC does not want to give us what we need, and we would need to fight and grieve these no matter what. And that's, I think, partly why the union members are here, to the head stewards to help in that fight.
Provide context. Unless you okay. I just want to provide context in terms of the access needs, because there have been several people today that have said they feel like the concessions that were made were not ones that they would have agreed upon. And I think it's fair to say your frustrations, because we hear them. We do think that everything that we asked for was not included, but it ultimately came down to having an access needs article or not having an access needs article. And what having an article does is allow us to continue to build upon that power, as well as have grievance and arbitration around whether or not the things that were not included are things that we can continue fighting for. And so I know that's difficult to hear, but that's like the things that we're talking about at the table. Like, is this going to be in our contract, or is it not going to be in our contract? And right now it's in our contract. And so I think that's the most important thing.
Again, to further provide context, one of the things that was discussed quite a bit with legal counsel during this time was that we really, in terms of like specific language and trying to say like, oh, okay, am I perfect? Okay, so to provide a little bit more context for the discussions that were happening at the time, one of the things that, in relation to what Jade was saying about whether this was going to be in our contract or not, one of the considerations that we also had to make were saying explicit things in the at the table or in the language, and then having the UC reject them was viewed as unfavorable in comparison to holding back, keeping our cards closer to our chest, and then not having them be explicitly rejected either through language or during table talk, so that we can then enforce these in an arbitration process later. And I just want to make it very, very clear that the onus of fulfilling the grievance and arbitration process is on one of the differences of having a union is that is on the union stewards, who will steward you and shepherd you through this process. That is not for you to do on your own.
So there are two comments on Zoom. One is from Philip that says, maybe we can explicitly offer lots of support for anyone filing a grievance, so no single community feels like they have an outsized burden. And then Sophie also said, this article, this Access Needs Disability article is clearly different. One was making things accessible by default, and the other, which we have now, is having to file grievances and add extra effort, essentially.
I will add that every single article that ends up in our contract will be different from the one that we started with.
Are there other access needs or disability questions? Oh, there's one in the corner. Oh, related to healthcare. Do you want to just come up here?
Hi, Nadia again, she, her, grad student. My beginning with a little bit of a comment. So UCSF Health as a hospital is classified as a nonprofit. And because of that, in the state of California and federally, there's required to provide charity care for low income people. And here in California, in San Francisco, that is 400% of the poverty wages, poverty level. And that is $54,000. So all of us grad students are below that number in what we're getting paid. And when that happens, UCSF Health is required to give 100% charity care. And I've been to student health, and every time that I get referred to UCSF Health for anything, I always get their ridiculous bill and ridiculous copays. So is there any push for, if we're not getting the wages that we're required to be above the poverty level, that the healthcare bills and the copays and everything that we're getting paying through UC Ship and UC Ship itself to at least go with what the state of California requires UCSF to help to do? And I'm just saying this because not a lot of people know this, but if you apply for it, your bills just magically disappear, but they don't tell anyone this. And I had to discover after a year of trying to talk to my insurance. And once I was done with it, I was just like, you know what, I'll just try this. And then it was over. And it stayed like that for almost a year. So my question is, are we going to ask of them to do more with our healthcare as we're paying UCSF Health and giving UCSF Health all of our work and expertise for their prestige?
So first of all, I want to say thank you for the hack. I did not know about that. That's amazing. And second of all, we do have a healthcare benefits article that we are bargaining over currently. That's part of the economic. I'm happy to email you that article and walk you through it. Unfortunately, I don't have it memorized right now, but I am, very happy if you were to reach out to me to walk you through it.
I believe the question was, if they know what we're being paid, can we get something in our contract to basically ensure we don't have to pay for healthcare costs? Is that right? Yeah. So I think one thing, and and the sentiment, I 100% agree with you. One thing that UC does and a lot of major academic medical centers do to insulate themselves is there's University of California and then UCSF Health, or whatever they call it at the other academic medical centers, and they are technically separate entities. I know that they're the same, right? But that's something that we are negotiating with University of California, not UCSF Health, for example. But it is important that we share that. And also with our new contract, we will be at or above 54,000. So that should be a moot point. But also, again, want to echo, thank you for sharing that hack. Important for people to know.
Okay. So I want to read one more comment on Zoom from Alex that says, I don't want to take up even more time on the access needs article, so I'd really encourage people to check out the tiny.cc/disability FAQ, where disabled organizers who are TAs responded to a lot of what the bargaining team just said. So want to encourage people to go check that out as well. And we can maybe write that down in a link here for people to see afterward too. Since we're running kind of low on time, I just wanted to open up a last 5 minutes of if there are questions that people have not had a chance to ask about articles that we haven't covered already. Please come now. This is kind of the last chance to ask any of the last questions that you had that are not related to some of the articles that we'd already talked about. And we're looking at the Zoom as well. So if anyone has a last question. Do you want to make the final announcement?
I've said this several times, but I want to say it again. Like, the power at the bargaining table comes from the picket line. Like, we can't actually make moves if we're not out on the picket line. And that's just the reality of the situation. Where we are now, the fact that UC has even begun to bargain with GSRs and ASCs over the last 2 weeks is because you guys have showed up to the picket line. It's not because we showed up to bargaining. It's because you were on the picket line, and that's where our power comes from, and that's where we need to continue driving home to our colleagues who are choosing to go back to work or those who have chosen not to come and join us on the picket lines.
Just want to echo what Jade said, in that, we made a lot of progress towards truly transformative contracts, and we need to keep the pressure up to continue to get some of these really important articles and themes that everybody has highlighted here. I also want to remind everybody, there isn't much special about bargaining team folks. We are workers. I'm a postdoc. We have our own research. We have our own lives too. And so just want to highlight that we appreciate the feedback, want to hear from people. And we are also in so many ways just like you.
Okay, I'll do last comment. I just want to say again how proud I am of everyone for showing up here every day, fighting alongside us. I've said multiple times before, and I'll reiterate again, that none of what we do would be possible without you.
All right. Thank you all for coming for this Q&A portion of the town hall. We know it was freezing, and so we really, really appreciate you guys being out here. We appreciate you guys coming on Zoom. It's so important that we have all of these dialogues now, and we do want to acknowledge that you guys had a lot of questions, and there are a few in the survey that we didn't have time to get through, but we're hoping, again, to read through all of these and answer them in emails. A couple of other things that we are trying to do as well is after each bargaining update that you guys have been getting regularly, we're going to try to incorporate more of a Q&A so that there is a chance to engage on a micro level and not have to do too many giant town halls as frequently. And then another thing is we're going to try to send out emails with some of the responses to the stuff you've put in this survey. So please feel free to add your questions to the survey after this if you haven't already. There were a couple of questions in there that were about strike pay. And I want to note that you can always come talk to our fabulous strike pay team here. So Stephanie's there. Yeah, anytime, please come and talk to people. It's better to have all of these dialogues now than later when we're kind of getting into the more final stages of negotiations. So now that we're all here, I want to turn this over to Brandon and Catherine, who are going to talk us through a little bit more of how we can continue to escalate and to build up our power. So thank you, Brandon and Catherine. Gonna turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Nice to see everyone out here for the afternoon shifts. So we're going to take a little break in a little bit, but before we do that, we just want to spend a couple minutes. We're entering the third week. Things have, gotten hard. We've all stopped our research for quite a while at this point. And we just want everyone to, maybe talk to the people, a couple of people around you. Think about who's in your lab that is still working, who isn't, completely withholding labor. And really think about what are some ideas that you might have for how we can get these people out here and how we can really, grow our numbers, especially in this kind of crunch time as we're You know, it sounds like we've heard a lot of great progress that's been working in the last week, and we really want to keep the pressure up to, you know, make sure that everyone gets a good contract. So we just want to spend, you know, 5 minutes, find a couple people around you, introduce yourselves, a good way to meet other people, and just, you know, maybe shoot around some ideas on how to get your coworkers out here that might, obviously they've heard about it at this point. So what can we do to get them out here? And I'll call you back in 5 minutes and we can share.